Hello, my fellow nature lovers. I'm Wilder. At 55, after years of leaving the noisy city lights behind to live among the vast wilderness and harsh deserts, I've realized that the wild always holds miracles. To me, animals are not mindless beasts. They are our brothers, our friends, and our greatest teachers. Today, by this crackling campfire, I want to tell you a story stained with blood, dust, and redemption. It is the fateful encounter between Jack, a former U.S. Navy SEAL in a faded red and black flannel shirt, carrying a soul shattered by war, and a creature that only exists in myths, a giant elephant wearing centuries-old bronze armor, silently guarding a golden tomb buried beneath an endless sea of sand. When a heavily armed group of desert bandits attacks out of bottomless greed, a veteran who has lost faith in humanity decides to stand his ground, fighting shoulder to shoulder with a wild spirit to protect the sanctity of history. In that life-or-death moment, fear gives way to belief, and survival instincts transform into a magnificent friendship that transcends the boundaries of species. But before we step into that sandstorm together, let Wilder know. Where in the world are you sitting right now listening to this story? Leave a comment below and let me know. And if you also believe that every living being has a soul, don't forget to hit that subscribe button to join our tribe. Now, close your eyes, take a deep breath, and listen to the desert wind. The sun beat down on the unforgiving expanse of the deep Saharan borderlands. The air didn't just blow, it scorched, carrying fine, razor-sharp grains of sand across dunes that stretched into infinity. It was 115 degrees in the shade, except there was no shade. There was just an endless ocean of blinding yellow, the heat waves distorting the horizon, and the relentless howling wind. If you want to disappear, this is where you go. And disappearing was exactly what Jack intended to do. Jack was 55 years old, though the deep crevices around his eyes and the stark white streaks in his rough, untamed beard made him look older. He was a former United States Navy SEAL. He was a man built of hardened muscle, scar tissue, and ghosts. If you looked at him, the first thing you would notice was his attire, so violently out of place in the desolate beige of the desert. He wore a heavy, faded red and black plaid flannel shirt. It was unbuttoned at the top, covered in layers of fine, pale dust, the fabric whipping wildly in the desert gales. It was the shirt of a lumberjack, of a man who belonged in the damp, cool pines of the Pacific Northwest, not the lethal furnace of the Sahara. But the shirt was an anchor. It was the last thing his brother had given him before a mortar shell in Kandahar took everything away. Jack was a man drowning in the dry air. He suffered from profound, crippling PTSD. He was a man who could not sleep without hearing the deafening crack of sniper fire. A man who couldn't walk through a crowded grocery store without scanning the ceiling for ambush points. The world of men had become too loud, too unpredictable, too full of triggers and sharp edges. So, he packed a tactical backpack, walked away from his pension, his cabin, and his life, and sought the only thing that made sense anymore: absolute, punishing silence. He wanted to walk into the wasteland until the ghosts could no longer follow him. But the desert, as empty as it seems, holds its own secrets, and on this particular afternoon, the wind carried something that stopped Jack dead in his tracks. It wasn't a sound, it was a smell. Copper, salt, the unmistakable heavy iron scent of blood. Jack's combat instincts, the very instincts he had come out here to kill, flared to life. His posture shifted. His denim blue eyes, previously dull and hollow, suddenly sharpened, scanning the shifting dunes. He unclipped the safety strap on the combat knife at his belt. He moved silently, a predator slipping through the sand, cresting the massive dune ahead of him. And then he looked down into the valley below. I want you to imagine what went through his mind in that exact moment. Jack had seen the impossible. He had seen the horrors of war, the limits of human endurance, the darkest corners of the earth. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared him for the sight at the bottom of that dune. It was a mountain of gray flesh, collapsed against the side of a wind-carved sandstone pillar. An elephant. But this was not a normal elephant. It was colossal, standing easily 12 feet at the shoulder, even while slumped in the sand, its tusks sweeping forward like massive ivory scimitars. But it wasn't the sheer size of the creature that made Jack's breath catch in his throat. It was what the animal was wearing. Strapped across its massive, scarred forehead, wrapping over its broad shoulders and protecting its vital chest cavity, were thick, heavy plates of metal, armor. It was ancient copper and bronze, tarnished and oxidized into a vibrant, ghostly green, and etched deeply into the metal were symbols, cuneiform, hieroglyphs, an ancient language that belonged in a museum behind bulletproof glass, not breathing and bleeding in the middle of nowhere. This was a creature of myth, a living relic, a guardian of an era that history had long forgotten. Yet, for all its majesty, the creature was dying. Jack slid down the face of the dune, the sand hissing beneath his combat boots. As he approached, the true grimness of the situation revealed itself. On the creature's massive front left leg, just above the knee joint, was a horrific wound. It wasn't a spear thrust or an animal bite. The flesh was torn and blackened, the bone underneath cracked. Jack knew ballistics better than he knew himself. That was a gunshot wound. Specifically, an armor-piercing round from a high-caliber heavy machine gun. Someone, or some group, had hunted this ancient king, and they had brought weapons of war to do it. The elephant's massive chest heaved. Its breathing was shallow, a wet, rattling sound that echoed off the canyon walls. Jack stopped a few yards away. He was a human, and humans, to this creature, clearly meant pain, bullets, and death. He expected the elephant to panic, to trumpet in rage, to try and drag its broken body up to crush him, but it didn't. The colossal head shifted slightly. A massive, heavily lashed eye locked onto Jack. If stories like this touch your heart, you have to understand this moment. Jack looked into that eye, and he did not see the wild, unthinking panic of a trapped beast. He saw an ancient, profound intelligence. He saw a sadness so deep it mirrored his own. The elephant looked at Jack's faded red and black plaid shirt, looked at his empty hands, and simply blinked. It was a look of complete resignation. The creature was hundreds of years old, carrying the weight of centuries, and it was tired, just like Jack. In that single, silent exchange, the barrier between species dissolved. Jack wasn't looking at an animal. He was looking at a fellow soldier who had been left behind. "I've got you," Jack whispered. His voice was raspy, unused for weeks, swallowed instantly by the roaring wind. "I'm not gonna hurt you. I've got you." Jack dropped his tactical backpack to the sand. He unzipped the main compartment. He didn't have much. He was out here to disappear, remember? He reached in and pulled out his aluminum canteen. He gave it a shake. The water sloshed inside, half a liter, maybe less. In the deep desert, that water wasn't just hydration. It was the only thing standing between him and a painful, agonizing death under the sun. It was his life. He didn't hesitate for a single second. Jack walked right up to the beast. The elephant's trunk, thick as a tree trunk and covered in coarse bristles, twitched but did not strike him. Jack uncapped the canteen. He poured the precious, life-saving water directly into his hands, gently splashing it over the ragged, blackened edges of the bullet wound, clearing away the sand and the infected grit. The elephant let out a low, deep rumble that vibrated through the soles of Jack's boots. It wasn't a threat. It was an acknowledgement. Next, Jack pulled out his military-grade trauma kit, the same kit he used to carry in the alleys of Fallujah. He ripped open a package of quick-clot combat gauze, material designed to stop catastrophic arterial bleeding in human soldiers. He packed the gauze deep into the wound, his hands steady, his face set in a mask of total concentration. The elephant flinched, a massive shudder rocking its armored body, but it allowed the tiny human to work. Jack took his pressure bandages, tying them tightly around the massive circumference of the leg, securing the dressing. His hands were covered in the creature's blood. His red and black shirt was stained darker now. When he finally finished, Jack stepped back, chest heaving, sweat stinging his eyes. He collapsed into the sand beside the elephant's massive head. He had no water left. He had no plan. He was stranded in the deep desert with a mythical armored beast that was being hunted by men with heavy artillery. But as Jack sat there, leaning his back against the cool, tarnished bronze of the elephant's armor, something incredible happened. The giant trunk slowly uncoiled. It reached out, moving with astonishing gentleness, and rested its heavy, leathery tip across Jack's lap. For the first time in 10 years, the deafening noise in Jack's head, the gunfire, the screaming, the ghosts of his past, went completely quiet. He wasn't a broken soldier anymore. He was a protector, and the desert, which he had walked into to die, had just given him a reason to live. The desert sun began its slow, fiery descent, casting long, bruised shadows across the dunes. The colossal elephant stirred, its massive chest expanding with a deep, rattling intake of breath that sounded like grinding tectonic plates. Jack sat utterly still, his faded red and black plaid shirt stiff with dried blood, watching as the ancient creature opened its eyes. Now that the frantic haze of pain had lifted, Jack could truly see the entity before him as a living, breathing character rather than just a casualty. This was no ordinary animal. Jack instinctively named him Kalah, an old word for survival he had picked up during a classified op in the region decades ago. Kalah was breathtaking, bearing the scars of centuries. He was over 300 years old, his skin a roadmap of deep fissures, resembling the parched earth of a drought-stricken valley. Despite his intimidating, 12-foot-tall armored stature, Kalah possessed a temperament of profound, stoic gentleness. His eyes held the weary wisdom of a soul that had witnessed the rise and fall of empires, yet still retained an immense, quiet dignity. He was a guardian who had outlived those he was meant to protect. As Kalah tested his injured leg, the heavy bronze armor clinking rhythmically, he paused and lowered his massive head toward Jack. The trunk, a marvel of muscle and sensitivity, reached out and brushed Jack's shoulder. It was a gesture of unmistakable gratitude, a silent acknowledgement that the small, fragile human had chosen compassion over fear. Kalah turned slowly, his enormous weight shifting carefully to spare the bandaged leg. He looked back over his shoulder, his trunk gesturing toward the shimmering horizon where the heat waves danced wildly over the sand. He wanted Jack to follow. As Jack fell into step beside the towering beast, his mind involuntarily drifted to his late brother, Thomas. It was Thomas who had given Jack the plaid shirt he now wore. Thomas had been everything Jack was not: tall, gangly, with a mop of unruly blonde hair, and a perpetually crooked smile that could disarm the most hostile stranger. While Jack saw the world in tactical grids and threat assessments, Thomas had been a boundless optimist, a man whose bright blue eyes always sought the inherent good in humanity. When Thomas was killed by a mortar shell in Kandahar, that optimism had died with him, leaving Jack hollow, paranoid, and bitter. Yet, walking beside this mythical behemoth through the unforgiving Sahara, Jack felt a strange thawing in his chest. For the first time since Thomas's death, the crushing weight of survivor's guilt seemed to recede, replaced by a strange, quiet awe. Kalah led them toward what appeared to be a solid, towering wall of red sandstone. But as they drew closer, the heat distortion, a remarkably complex, permanent mirage, suddenly warped and parted. What looked like a solid rock face was actually an optical illusion created by the unique thermal currents of the valley, concealing a massive, jagged cleft in the earth. They stepped out of the blinding, oppressive heat and into the cool, cavernous dark of the hidden canyon. The temperature dropped instantly, the air smelling of ancient dust and cold stone. Kalah navigated the narrow, winding passage with surprising grace for a creature of his size, his armored plates scraping softly against the rock walls. The passage gradually widened, opening into a subterranean expanse so massive that Jack's combat flashlight barely scratched the darkness. As Jack's eyes adjusted, the beam of his light caught a reflection that made him stop dead in his tracks. Gold. Mountains of it. They had entered a colossal tomb, a burial chamber of unimaginable scale. Heaps of golden coins, silver ingots, and precious jewels were piled like careless mounds of gravel across the smooth stone floor. Towering statues of forgotten deities stood sentry in the shadows, their eyes made of fist-sized sapphires. It was a treasure trove that would make the wealthiest monarchs in history weep with envy. Any other man would have fallen to his knees, overwhelmed by the intoxicating promise of infinite wealth. But Jack simply lowered his flashlight. He didn't care about the gold. His eyes bypassed the glittering fortunes and instead locked onto the intricate frescoes carved into the cavern walls. Jack walked slowly toward the nearest wall, brushing away a thick layer of centuries-old dust. The paintings, perfectly preserved in the dry, sealed environment, told a breathtaking story. They depicted a lineage of massive elephants, exactly like Kalah, adorned in the very same copper and bronze armor. These divine creatures were shown standing guard over the slumbering pharaohs, serving as the eternal protectors of the sacred tombs. They were a mythical breed, engineered by ancient priests and blessed with lifespans stretching across hundreds of years, bound by a sacred duty to watch over the golden cities of the dead. Jack looked from the wall to Kalah. The elephant was standing quietly amidst a sea of gold, looking at Jack with those deep, knowing eyes. Suddenly, Kalah lifted his trunk and let out a deep, resonant roar. It wasn't a sound of aggression. It was a pure, vibrating frequency that echoed off the vaulted ceiling and resonated right in Jack's chest. It was a song of welcome, a profound thank you from a creature that had been utterly alone for generations. Kalah then lowered his head and began to gently sift through a nearby mound of treasure with his trunk. Gold coins and diamond-encrusted chalices clattered to the side, discarded like worthless stones. Finally, the elephant found what he was looking for. He curled his trunk around a small, spherical object and carefully extended it toward Jack. He placed it gently into Jack's open hands. It was an apple, crafted entirely of solid gold, though tarnished and flecked with spots of ancient green rust. It wasn't a bribe, it was an offering of friendship. Jack held the heavy, rusty golden apple, feeling the cool metal against his calloused palms. He looked at the vast fortune surrounding him, and then he looked at the wounded, magnificent creature that had brought him here. In that moment, Jack's fragmented soul crystallized into a singular, unwavering desire. He didn't want the gold. He didn't want to disappear anymore. His desire was simple and absolute. He was going to protect this wondrous creature. He was going to stand between Kalah and the cruel, greedy world outside, no matter the cost. The profound silence of the subterranean tomb was a fragile, sacred thing. For a few fleeting minutes, Jack stood in the shimmering, golden twilight of the cavern, the heavy, rust-flecked apple resting in his calloused palms. Beside him, Kalah, the ancient armored elephant, swayed gently, his massive form casting a mountainous shadow against the treasure-heaped walls. The cool air of the cavern was a soothing balm, compared to the punishing furnace of the Sahara above. Jack felt a strange, unfamiliar rhythm in his chest. It was the steady, calm heartbeat of a man who had finally found a purpose after a decade of drifting through his own personal purgatory. But the desert is a cruel and jealous mistress. It does not allow peace to linger for long. The disruption did not begin as a sound, but as a vibration. It started as a faint, rhythmic trembling in the soles of Jack's combat boots, a harsh, mechanical stutter that felt completely alien against the ancient stone. Then, the sound breached the hidden canyon. It was the guttural, roaring whine of heavy diesel engines, amplified and distorted by the narrow rock walls of the thermal mirage outside. The sudden noise was violent, tearing through the sacred quiet of the tomb like a jagged blade. Outside the illusionary heat veil, a convoy of 3 battered, sand-colored Toyota Hilux trucks ground to a halt. The vehicles were heavily modified, stripped of their doors and fitted with reinforced roll cages, their beds bristling with mounted weaponry. From the lead truck stepped Tariq Al-Fayed, a man whose reputation in the black markets of North Africa was as dark as pitch. Tariq was in his early 40s, a lean, sinewy predator of a man who moved with a terrifying, coiled energy. He wore a faded, sand-dusted military tactical vest over a loose, dark thobe, a battered red keffiyeh wrapped loosely around his neck. If you looked closely at his face, you would see the brutal map of his life. His left ear was half missing, sheared off by a rival's machete during a diamond smuggling dispute in Sierra Leone years ago, and his eyes were like chipped black flint, utterly devoid of empathy, warmth, or remorse. Tariq was a sociopath, driven by an insatiable, bottomless greed. He possessed no political ideology or religious fervor. He worshipped only at the altar of wealth and power. For weeks, he and his mercenary crew had been tracking rumors of a mythical, armored beast wandering the deep wastes, a creature said to guard the lost fortunes of the ancients. When they had finally ambushed it yesterday, hitting it with an armor-piercing round, Tariq thought the prize was his, but the beast had escaped into the dunes. Now, Tariq was here to finish the job and claim his bloody paycheck. Beside Tariq stood Kadir, his second-in-command and lead tracker. Kadir was much younger, perhaps 25, a stocky, nervous young man whose eyes constantly darted behind thick, dust-caked tactical goggles. Unlike Tariq, Kadir was ruled by fear of the desert, fear of the mythical beast they were hunting, but most of all, fear of Tariq himself. Kadir carried a heavy PKM machine gun slung across his broad shoulders, his hands trembling slightly as he pointed toward the shimmering heat wave at the base of the red sandstone cliff. "The blood trail ends here, boss," Kadir stammered, his voice tight. He nudged a large, dark crimson stain on the sand with the toe of his boot. It walked right into the rock face. It makes no sense. The heat, it's a trick of the light, a thermal pocket. Tariq did not answer immediately. He unslung an aging but deadly RPG-7 from his back, inspecting the warhead with cold precision. He signaled to the 10 other heavily armed men piling out of the trucks. They were a motley assortment of ruthless killers, carrying AK-47s, bandoliers of high-explosive grenades, and blocks of C4 plastic explosives. Tariq smiled, a thin, cruel stretching of his scarred lips. "It is not a trick, Kadir. It is a door, and whatever is hiding behind it is going to make us kings. Load the armor-piercing belts. If the beast moves, you shred its legs. Then we take the gold." Inside the tomb, the echo of the diesel engines and the harsh, barking shouts of the men outside bounced off the vaulted ceilings. The effect on Kalah was immediate and heartbreaking. The ancient elephant's demeanor shifted from calm gratitude to visceral, primal distress. He remembered those voices. He remembered the deafening crack of their weapons and the searing, white-hot agony of the bullet tearing through his leg. Kalah let out a low, rumbling groan of distress. His massive, fan-like ears flared out wide, catching the stale air, and he began to shift his enormous weight nervously. As he moved, the heavy plates of his tarnished copper and bronze armor clanked loudly against one another, a metallic symphony of impending war. He stepped in front of Jack, instinctively trying to shield the small human with his own wounded body, a guardian even in his darkest hour of vulnerability. Jack watched the elephant's distress, and in that split second, the traumatized, broken veteran wearing the faded red and black plaid shirt vanished. The ghosts of Kandahar retreated to the deepest corners of his mind, replaced by the icy, hyper-focused clarity of a Tier 1 operator. His breathing slowed, his heart rate leveled out into a steady, rhythmic thud. He slipped the rusty golden apple into his tactical backpack and let the pack slide quietly to the stone floor. He reached down to his thigh rig and unclipped his combat knife. It wasn't a firearm, but in the hands of a SEAL operating in close quarters, the 7-inch, matte black tactical dagger was a devastating instrument of silent lethality. "Easy, big guy, easy, Kalah," Jack whispered, his voice a low, steady frequency that cut through the echoing noise from outside. He placed a firm, reassuring hand on the elephant's cold, armored flank. "They aren't taking you, and they aren't taking this place. Not today." Jack spun around, his denim blue eyes scanning the colossal chamber, no longer looking at the gold, but mapping the environment as a battlefield. His tactical mind processed the variables at lightning speed. It was a 10-on-1 fight, heavily skewed in firepower. Direct confrontation was suicide. But Jack had the darkness, he had the terrain, and he had a 3-ton armored ally. He noted the narrow, bottleneck entrance of the cavern, a perfect kill zone. He saw the towering, shadowed statues of the ancient deities, perfect for breaking lines of sight and setting up ambushes. And, most importantly, looking up at the vaulted ceiling and the massive stone pillars supporting it, Jack realized that a tomb built to protect the pharaohs for eternity would not have been left undefended. There were grooves in the floor, counterweights hidden in the shadows, and tension lines buried in the dust. The ancients had rigged this place. It was a labyrinth of dormant traps waiting to be woken up. Outside, the heavy thud of combat boots echoed down the canyon passage. The beams of powerful tactical flashlights pierced the mirage, cutting through the darkness and sweeping across the mountains of gold just inside the entrance. Tariq's men were breaching the tomb. Jack gripped his dagger tightly, the blade absorbing the faint light. He looked up at Kalah, giving the ancient guardian a single, sharp nod. The darkness had come, but Jack was no longer running from it. He was going to use it. The illusion of the thermal mirage shattered as the vanguard of Tariq's mercenaries breached the hidden canyon. They did not enter with caution. They spilled into the cavern like a localized storm of violence, their tactical flashlights cutting erratic, blinding arcs through the ancient darkness. Leading the charge was Hassan, Tariq's point man and chief enforcer. Hassan was a mountain of a man, a brute from the concrete slums of Cairo who had traded back-alley brawls for the lucrative, blood-soaked world of desert piracy. He wore a patchwork of mismatched, heavily soiled tactical gear stretched dangerously tight over his barrel chest, his thick, matted black beard coated in a layer of pale dust. Hassan was not a tactician. He was a blunt instrument, a man utterly devoid of discipline, driven purely by the adrenaline of the kill and the promise of plunder. Armed with a drum-fed, fully automatic combat shotgun, he took one look at the towering shadows and the glinting mountains of gold and let out a guttural roar of triumph. Without waiting for a command, Hassan leveled his weapon and squeezed the trigger, firing blindly into the cavern. The deafening, concussive boom of the shotgun was magnified 100-fold by the vaulted stone ceilings, creating a terrifying wall of noise. The rest of the mercenaries, infected by his bloodlust, opened fire. A hail of lead tore through the tomb, shattering ancient clay urns, chipping the sapphire eyes of the forgotten statues, and sending showers of golden coins spinning violently into the air. Direct confrontation against that volume of concentrated firepower was a death sentence. Jack knew this in his bones. The former Navy SEAL didn't flinch, nor did he return fire with the limited sidearm he didn't even possess. Instead, he slapped the heavy, armored flank of the giant elephant. "Back, Kalah! Move back!" Jack ordered, his voice an urgent, carrying hiss. Kalah possessed a profound, ancient intelligence. The 300-year-old beast did not trumpet in blind panic or charge the flashing muzzles. He understood the tactical retreat. Pivoting on his good legs, favoring the heavily bandaged, bullet-torn limb, Kalah moved deeper into the labyrinthine depths of the cavern, his massive form melting into the suffocating darkness, just beyond the reach of the mercenaries' flashlights. Jack moved with him, sprinting in the colossal shadow of the beast, his faded red and black plaid shirt covered in dust, making him nearly invisible against the sandstone walls. The mercenaries poured deeper into the tomb, their muzzle flashes illuminating the space in strobe light bursts of terrifying violence. Stray bullets ricocheted wildly off the stone walls, whining through the air like angry hornets. Several high-velocity rounds found their mark, striking Kalah as he covered Jack's retreat. But the pharaohs had armored their guardians well. The ancient, tarnished copper and bronze plates covering the elephant's hindquarters and flanks took the impacts. Each strike produced a brilliant, showers of orange sparks, a localized firework display in the pitch blackness. The metal dented, but it did not yield. Kalah let out a low, vibrating rumble of discomfort, but he held his ground, acting as a massive, living shield for the fragile human darting around his legs. Jack watched the sparks fly off the beast's armor and felt a surge of fierce, protective loyalty. The creature was taking fire for him. As they fell back, Jack's eyes continuously scanned the ancient architecture. He wasn't just looking for cover, he was looking for a weapon. He found it near the center of the grand hall. Towering above them was a massive sandstone pillar, nearly 20 feet in circumference, supporting a heavily fractured section of the vaulted ceiling. Time and tectonic shifts had not been kind to it. A deep, jagged fissure ran up its base, weakening its structural integrity. It was a strategic vulnerability. Jack patted Kalah's trunk and pointed his tactical combat dagger directly at the cracked base of the column. "There," Jack commanded. "Hit it with everything you have." Kalah understood. The elephant backed up a few paces, his massive head lowering, the heavy bronze plates of his forehead armor aligning perfectly with the stone. With a sudden, explosive burst of momentum that belied his massive size and injured leg, Kalah charged. He slammed into the weakened pillar with the force of a runaway freight train. The impact was cataclysmic. A shockwave reverberated through the floorboards of the earth. For a split second, nothing happened. Then, with a sound like tearing canvas, the pillar groaned, buckled, and snapped. Hassan and the vanguard of mercenaries, blindly rushing forward toward the sound of the impact, looked up just in time. The ceiling gave way. A hailstorm of massive, ton-heavy sandstone blocks and centuries of accumulated debris cascaded down upon them. Hassan's scream was abruptly cut short as a slab of rock the size of a small car crushed him and 3 other men instantly, burying them beneath an impenetrable mound of rubble. A choking cloud of white dust exploded outward, plunging the chamber into absolute coughing blindness. Jack did not waste a single second of the chaos. As Tariq and the surviving men faltered, coughing and firing blindly into the dust cloud, Jack separated from Kalah. He became the ghost he was trained to be, slipping seamlessly into the absolute darkness of the tomb's perimeter. He moved with silent, fluid grace, his combat boots making no sound on the stone. He was hunting. Running his gloved hands along the intricately carved walls, Jack's acute tactile senses searched for anomalies. The ancients who built this tomb did not rely solely on crushing weight to protect their kings. Jack felt a slight depression in the stone, followed by the faint, taut resistance of a hidden cord. Woven hemp and animal gut, hardened by centuries of dry air, but still holding lethal mechanical tension. It was the trigger line for the tomb's inner defense grid. Jack gripped his matte black tactical dagger, reversing his hold so the blade faced inward. He didn't hesitate. With a swift, brutal slash, he cut the primary tension wire. The ancient mechanisms, asleep for thousands of years, woke up with a terrifying chorus of mechanical clicks and grinding gears. From the shadowed alcoves along the walls, hidden ports snapped open. A deadly volley of heavy, foot-long bronze spikes shot horizontally across the chamber at waist height, driven by massive internal counterweights. 2 of Tariq's men were impaled instantly, their bodies pinned violently against the opposing walls. Simultaneously, from the floor grates, a cloud of poisoned darts, their tips coated in a toxic resin that had long since crystallized but remained fatally potent, whirred upward. They struck the mercenaries in any exposed skin, piercing tactical vests and embedded into throats and arms. The men dropped their weapons, clawing at their necks as the ancient neurotoxin seized their nervous systems, paralyzing them in agonizing seconds. Kadir, Tariq's fearful second-in-command, watched the carnage unfold through the settling dust. He saw the bodies of his comrades torn apart by the very walls of the tomb. He dropped his PKM machine gun, his nerve entirely broken. "It's a trap! The whole place is alive!" Kadir screamed, scrambling backward toward the entrance. Tariq, his face bleeding from a flying rock splinter, his eyes wide with a mixture of rage and disbelief, leveled his weapon at Kadir. But the chaos was too absolute. The dance of stone and sand had turned the golden tomb into a slaughterhouse. Deep in the shadows, Jack wiped the dust from his combat knife, his breathing steady, his eyes locked on the surviving leader. Beside him, the colossal, armored form of Kalah stepped silently forward, the green tarnished bronze plates glinting in the faint, dying light of a dropped flashlight. They had survived the initial storm, turning the greed of the intruders into their own executioner. The conflict had reached its boiling point, and the ancient guardian and the modern soldier stood unbroken, ready for the final strike. The echoing screams of the dying mercenaries faded into a suffocating, heavy silence, leaving only the hiss of settling dust and the sharp, acrid stench of cordite hanging in the subterranean air. Kadir, the fearful tracker, had completely vanished into the labyrinth, abandoning his commander to the darkness. But Tariq al-Fayed was not a man who retreated. The loss of his crew did not inspire grief. It only fueled a psychotic, burning rage. Stripped of his usual cold, calculating demeanor, Tariq emerged from the choking white cloud of pulverized sandstone like a demon forged in the Sahara. His tactical thobe was shredded, his face a mask of blood and white dust, and his dark eyes burned with an unhinged, homicidal desperation. He had dropped his jammed rifle. In its place, he gripped a standalone 40mm tactical grenade launcher, a devastating weapon designed to breach fortified military bunkers. He was no longer hunting for wealth. he was hunting for utter annihilation. Deep within the shifting shadows of the Golden Tomb, Jack and Kalah were running out of time and space. The ancient guardian's immense strength was finally failing. The heavy, armor-piercing round embedded in Kalah's leg had caused catastrophic blood loss, and the monumental effort of shattering the stone pillar had drained the last of his mythical endurance. Kalah's massive, bronze-plated knees buckled, the tarnished armor grinding harshly against the stone floor as he collapsed. His breathing was wet and ragged, each exhale shuddering through his colossal frame. Jack, too, was reaching his physical limit. A jagged piece of flying shrapnel from the previous firefight had grazed Jack's shoulder, tearing through his flesh. Warm, thick blood poured continuously from the wound, heavily soaking his faded red and black checkered shirt. The dark crimson stains spread rapidly across the familiar plaid pattern, a stark visual reminder of his mortality in this timeless place. Supporting Kalah, Jack guided the beast down a narrow, glittering corridor piled high with silver ingots, only to find the path abruptly sealed. They had hit a dead end. Before them stood a solid, impenetrable wall of black granite, deeply engraved with towering figures of the underworld gods. There were no more dormant traps to trigger, no more shadows to disappear into, and nowhere left to run. Heavy combat boots crunched against the sea of gold coins behind them. Tariq stepped into the dim, ambient glow of a discarded flashlight, his weapon raised and leveled directly at the collapsed elephant. The mercenary leader's chest heaved, a twisted, bloody smile stretching across his scarred face. He had the mythical beast cornered, and he had the explosive payload to end it all in one squeeze of the trigger. For Jack, the ghosts of Kandahar roared back to life. Every ingrained instinct forged by years of elite Navy SEAL training screamed at him to dive, to find cover behind the mounds of treasure, to preserve his own life at all costs. It was the primal, hardwired reflex of a soldier reacting to an imminent explosive threat. It was the instinct that had kept him alive when his brother Thomas had died. But as Jack's muscles tensed to sprint away, he stopped. He turned and looked at Kalah. The ancient elephant raised his heavy, armored head, and in that fleeting, suspended moment of life and death, their eyes met. Kalah's massive, long-lashed eye held no panic, no anger, only a profound, tragic acceptance of his fate, and a deep, silent gratitude for the human who had tried to save him. Jack looked at the ancient guardian, and the suffocating trauma that had defined the last 10 years of his life simply evaporated. The fear vanished, entirely consumed by an unwavering, unconditional faith. Jack realized that surviving simply to exist was a curse, but dying to protect something pure was a salvation. Defying every law of self-preservation, Jack did not run for cover. Instead, he stepped directly in front of the massive elephant, placing his fragile, blood-soaked body between the 40mm grenade launcher and the fallen beast. He spread his arms wide, his red and black checkered shirt standing out like a beacon in the gloom. He was offering his life for Kalah's. Tariq laughed, a harsh, barking sound that echoed off the granite walls, and his finger tightened on the trigger. But Kalah saw the sacrifice. The 300-year-old creature, witnessing this tiny, broken human willingly step into the jaws of death for him, experienced a transformation of his own. A mythical reserve of dormant energy, fueled by centuries of protective instinct and an overwhelming surge of love, ignited within the beast. Kalah did not just stand up, he erupted, letting out a deafening, earth-shattering roar that vibrated the very marrow in Jack's bones. The armored elephant launched himself forward. Ignoring the blinding agony in his shattered leg, Kalah bypassed Jack in a blur of gray flesh and oxidized bronze. Tariq panicked. He jerked the weapon upward and pulled the trigger, just as the colossal shadow eclipsed him. With the last ounce of strength in his ancient body, Kalah swung his massive trunk. It moved through the air with the devastating, unstoppable kinetic force of a heavy industrial sledgehammer. The thick, bristled muscle connected squarely with Tariq's chest, with a sickening, percussive crack. The impact lifted the mercenary leader entirely off his feet. Tariq was launched backward, flying weightlessly through the cavernous air for 30 feet. He crashed violently down into the center of the kill zone Jack had created moments ago, impaling himself fatally upon the bed of exposed bronze spikes from the triggered ancient trap. Tariq Al-Fayed moved no more. Simultaneously, the 40mm grenade erupted from the launcher. Because Kalah's devastating strike had knocked Tariq's aim wildly off course, the explosive projectile missed Jack and the elephant completely. Instead, it spiraled high into the air, striking the very apex of the tomb's vaulted sandstone dome. The resulting explosion was catastrophic. A blinding flash of orange fire illuminated the cavern, followed immediately by a concussive shockwave that knocked Jack flat onto his back. The ceiling groaned, cracked, and then gave way entirely. A massive section of the cavern roof collapsed inward, sending tons of rock and sand cascading down into the peripheral shadows. But as the deafening roar of the cave-in subsided and the dust began to settle, a miraculous transformation occurred. The blast had blown a gaping hole straight through the subterranean ceiling, breaching the surface of the desert above. A brilliant, thick pillar of pure, unfiltered Saharan sunlight pierced the gloom, pouring directly down into the golden tomb. The light caught the millions of floating dust particles, turning them into a swirling vortex of glittering magic. The radiant beam illuminated the dusty, blood-stained battlefield, washing over the mountains of gold and silver. Jack pushed himself up from the floor, clutching his bleeding shoulder. He looked to his right. Kalah stood bathed in the divine golden sunlight, his tarnished bronze armor gleaming brilliantly, his chest heaving with exhaustion, but his eyes alive with victory. The darkness had been vanquished. Fear had been completely transformed into an unbreakable, transcendent faith between two weary warriors. The brilliant shaft of unfiltered Saharan sunlight poured through the newly violently created skylight, cutting through the suffocating darkness of the ancient tomb like a divine blade. It illuminated the settling dust, turning the pulverized sandstone into a swirling vortex of glittering, golden fireflies. The deafening roar of the battle, the staccato cracks of gunfire, and the terrifying mechanical grinding of the ancient traps had all ceased, replaced by a profound, monumental silence. Tariq al-Fayed lay motionless upon the bronze spikes of the ancients, his insatiable greed having finally bought him a permanent place among the dead he had sought to rob. The threat was entirely eradicated. The boundless treasure of the forgotten pharaohs, mountains of gold coins, silver ingots, and sapphire-eyed statues, remained undisturbed in the shadows, safe from the modern world. But for Jack, the former Navy SEAL who had walked into the desert seeking his own demise, the glittering wealth surrounding him was entirely invisible. His denim blue eyes were fixed solely on the colossal, armored figure standing in the center of the light. Kalah, the 300-year-old mythical guardian, had fought his final battle. The immense surge of adrenaline and protective instinct that had fueled the beast's last, devastating strike was rapidly evaporating, leaving behind only the cruel reality of his shattered, bleeding body. With a sound like a falling ancient redwood, Kalah's massive, bronze-plated knees finally buckled. The heavy, green-tarnished armor scraped agonizingly against the smooth stone floor as the giant elephant collapsed onto a bed of scattered silver plates and golden chalices. His chest, protected by the thick, inscribed copper plating, heaved with a wet, rattling exertion. The armor-piercing round from the mercenaries had done too much damage. The blood loss was catastrophic, and the sheer physical toll of bringing down the stone pillars had completely exhausted the mythical reserves of his ancient heart. Jack sprinted across the cavern floor, his combat boots slipping on loose coins, and slid to his knees beside the fallen Leviathan. Jack's own shoulder was bleeding heavily, his faded red and black checkered shirt now completely saturated and clinging to his skin, but he felt no pain. He dropped his tactical knife and placed both of his trembling, blood-stained hands gently upon the coarse, bristled skin of Kalah's massive trunk. The elephant let out a low, vibrating rumble, a sound so deep Jack felt it resonate in his own ribcage, and slowly turned his magnificent head. The ancient, deeply lashed eye looked at Jack. There was no pain in that gaze, only a profound, oceanic exhaustion, and a quiet, dignified peace. Kalah had guarded this tomb through centuries of darkness, outliving his creators, his kin, and his era. He had been utterly alone until this broken human had walked out of the sand and chosen to bleed beside him. As Jack sat there, stroking the leathery skin of the dying guardian, a sudden, vivid memory surfaced from the deepest, locked vaults of his mind. He remembered his old commanding officer, Captain David Miller. Captain Miller was a stout, barrel-chested man in his late 40s, with a razor-sharp, high-and-tight haircut, a jawline like an anvil, and eyes like cold, gray steel. Miller was a legendary tactician, but beneath his harsh exterior, he possessed a fiercely protective paternal instinct toward his men. He was a man who firmly believed that a soldier's true worth was never measured by the lives he took, but entirely by the fragile things he chose to protect against the darkness. It was Captain Miller who had held Jack back when his brother Thomas was killed. Miller, who had told him that surviving a tragedy was not a punishment, but a sacred duty to carry the light of the fallen. For 10 years, Jack had failed to understand that lesson, drowning in his PTSD and survivor's guilt. But now, sitting in the golden ruins of a forgotten civilization, looking into the eyes of a dying myth, Captain Miller's words finally made absolute sense. Jack leaned his forehead against Kalah's warm trunk, his tears carving clean tracks through the thick white dust and dried blood on his face. "You did it, buddy," Jack whispered, his voice cracking, the words swallowed by the vastness of the cavern. "Your watch is over. You kept them safe. You can rest now. I've got the perimeter." Kalah let out one final, soft exhale, a gentle breath that stirred the dust around Jack's boots. The massive eye slowly drifted closed. The rhythmic, deep rumbling in his chest slowed to a halt. The ancient guardian of the Golden Tomb had finally passed into the millennial slumber, joining the pharaohs he had protected for centuries. Jack remained kneeling beside his fallen comrade for a long time, the silence of the tomb wrapping around him like a heavy, comforting blanket. When he finally stood up, his body ached, but his mind was clearer than it had been in a decade. The oppressive, deafening noise of the war zone that had haunted his every waking moment was completely gone, replaced by the stoic, timeless quiet of the desert. He looked around the colossal chamber. To his left and right lay enough wealth to buy small countries, a temptation that had driven men like Tariq to madness and murder. Jack felt absolutely nothing for it. The gold was cold, dead metal. It belonged to the earth, and it belonged to Kalah. Jack reached up to his neck and unclasped the silver bead chain resting against his collarbone. Suspended from the chain were 2 metal dog tags, his own, and the one belonging to his late brother, Thomas. These tags were the heaviest things Jack had ever carried, the iron anchors of his grief. With solemn, deliberate reverence, Jack walked to Kalah's massive, sweeping ivory tusk. He wrapped the silver chain tightly around the base of the tusk, securing the dog tags against the ancient ivory. It was the highest military honor Jack could bestow, a soldier leaving his identity with a fallen brother in arms. "Semper Fi," Jack murmured, giving the tusk a final, gentle pat. But Jack's mission was not entirely finished. The hole in the ceiling had exposed the tomb, and where there was one Tariq, others would eventually follow. Jack walked over to the crushed remains of the mercenary vanguard and began systematically stripping their tactical vests. He gathered every remaining block of C4 plastic explosive, every blasting cap, and every coil of detonation wire he could find. Moving with the cold, efficient precision of a Tier 1 operator, Jack wired the heavy structural supports near the entrance of the cavern, specifically targeting the natural fault lines in the red sandstone that created the hidden canyon's thermal mirage. He rigged the explosives to the main support columns that held the narrow canyon walls together, creating a devastating chain reaction designed to bury the entrance under thousands of tons of impenetrable rock. Jack picked up his tactical backpack, leaving the rusty golden apple resting gently against Kalah's front leg as a final tribute. He walked out of the cool, dark cavern, moving through the shimmering optical illusion of the entrance, and stepped back out into the punishing 115-degree heat of the deep Sahara. The blinding yellow light washed over him, but he no longer felt like he was drowning in it. He unspooled the detonation wire, walking a safe distance up the nearest towering sand dune. He turned back, looking at the thermal distortion that hid the greatest archaeological secret in human history. Jack gripped the remote detonator. He didn't hesitate, nor did he look back with regret. He squeezed the trigger. The desert earth convulsed violently. A series of deep, concussive thuds echoed rapidly, shaking the dunes for miles in every direction. The red sandstone cliff face visibly buckled, groaned, and then collapsed entirely inward in a catastrophic avalanche of rock, sand, and dust. The hidden canyon was instantly obliterated, filled with thousands of tons of solid earth. The thermal mirage vanished, replaced by a sheer, impassable wall of collapsed rubble. The entrance to the Golden Tomb and the ancient, armored guardians sleeping within it were sealed away forever, buried so deep that no map and no mercenary would ever find them again. Jack stood on the crest of the dune, the heavy desert wind immediately rushing in to sweep away the dust cloud, erasing the footprints and the bloodstains from the sand. He was battered, bleeding, and entirely without water. But as he turned his back on the buried mountain and began the long, grueling trek towards civilization, Jack smiled. The faded red and black checkered shirt whipped in the wind, carrying a man whose soul had finally been healed. As the desert wind settles on the story of Jack and the ancient guardian, there is a gentle truth left behind for all of us here around the campfire. We often walk through our daily lives wearing our own invisible armor, carrying unseen wounds. We might feel tired or broken by the everyday battles we face. But this story reminds us that healing does not come from building walls or hiding in the vast deserts of our minds. True healing begins the moment we look past our own suffering to offer compassion to another living soul. Whether it is offering a kind word to a struggling friend, caring for a stray animal, or simply standing up for someone in need, that act of selfless love is the exact medicine our own hearts require to find peace. If this journey touched your soul, please share it with someone who might need a reminder that they are not alone. Leave a comment below to tell me your thoughts on this bond between a broken soldier and a mythic beast. I also invite you to subscribe to the channel so we can continue exploring these wild and beautiful paths together. May God bless you and your loved ones with deep peace, healing, and strength for the roads ahead. If you truly believe that compassion can heal the deepest wounds of this world, please type Amen in the comments below. Let that word stand as a testament to our shared faith in the goodness of the human spirit. Thank you for walking this trail with me.